Hello everyone, welcome to Uncle Iroh's Tea Shop. In today's video, we are going to be continuing my review of the Avatar The Last Airbender comic called The Promise, and today we are running through part 2. If you are excited for this video, be sure to drop a like if you've read the comic, and comment down below your thoughts on my commentary as we run through this review of part 2. So, like I said, we are continuing through and talking about part 2 today, and I'm going to do something a little differently than what I did with part 1. Instead of going through each section in order, I'm just going to talk about each of the different 3 main plots that this part 2 splits up into. The first one I want to discuss is around the subplot of Toph and her metal bending school students. I actually personally find so far in this comic this to be the weakest thing I've seen in it, and don't get me wrong, I think it's a little side plot, but I'm just so much more invested in the overall main plot with the restoration movement and the stuff going on around Zuko. This metal bending school subplot kind of reminds me of some of the episodes in the cartoon where there was an obvious main plot that was being focused on, but then there would also be a filler subplot that would be mixed in with it. I can't knock it for that because it does remind me of the cartoon, and this comic so far feels like I'm watching, like, you know, a 2-episode arc. There is a point in this subplot where they do mention that the reason her school is being taken back over by the Fire Nation master Kuei is because of the restoration movement, so I appreciate that they did put that in there with that plot. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I don't dislike it, but I'm also not totally invested. Sokka is pretty much only in this plotline for the comedic humor, which is not unordinary for him at all. I definitely like at the end of part 2, we see that Toph gets her students to come around and finally learn metal bending, and they defeat Master Kuei and his students to take back the school. Toph had to go through some self-searching to kind of get to that point, and I like that that's a cool area of character development in her, especially now that she is progressing in her life as this new person, essentially as a metal bending teacher. I haven't read part 3 yet, but I will see if that plotline continues in any way, or if now Toph and Sokka reunite with Katara and Aang to stop another war. I would also include that out of nowhere, there's also another very small plotline where we see the assassin girl named Kori training some earthbenders and firebenders at Udao, and a freedom fighter girl named Sneers, which is Kori's girlfriend, comes in to say hi, but immediately drops the ball by telling Kori that she is a part of the resistance movement outside her city. So it kind of seems like there's another feud brewing between another group of people, which is the resistance movement, and also now this girl Kori inside of the city of Udao, which, as we know, she is the daughter of the mayor inside of the city. So I'd be curious to see where that also leads to. This is also kind of a good way to transition over to the other subplot with the Aang fan club storyline. And while I am also not as interested in this as well, I did find that there was something interesting that came out of it at the end when he and Katara leave this fan club of girls in Ba Sing Se. He says spending time with that club made it feel like he was with his people again, and I like that addition into the moment. Aang does have a new family now with the people around him, but I do like the inclusion here to point out that they are not really technically his true family. At this moment in the story, he is still the only nomad left from the Air Nation, and so when he still has that disconnect to that part of society, that is true to him and his people, and I like that he can be able to think about them when he's around others who are not like the Air Nomads. Other than that, here in part 2, the fan club thing was just a fun and cute side thing that I didn't really care all that much for. It is only a part of that plotline where we get to the conversation that he and Katara have with Earth King Kuei that things get completely out of hand. They tell him that he needs to consider having a sit-down conversation with Zuko about the restoration movement and their disagreements. The Earth King goes on to think about it for a while, and after that, he, in a very stupid way, decides to send an army to the Fire Nation colony of Udao, as was shown in part 1. That is just not a very smart decision there on the Earth King, and quite frankly, he's not really the brightest character in this timeline of characters, so it kind of makes sense that he did do this because of who he is. He is taking the opposite approach to something that I mentioned in the last video about sitting down and having a conversation as opposed to fighting, which leads to nothing but bad things. This is where it also leads us into the other plot line of part 2 and the final one, which is around Zuko. This was actually probably my favorite part of part 2. I think there was a lot more to this, and also a lot more character exploration in this plotline, as it does heavily focus on that. I don't think it goes without saying, but Zuko is probably arguably the most conflicting character out of all the characters in this Avatar The Last Airbender story. Part 2 explores that a lot more, where you've got the scenes of him going to the prison to Ozai for advice, or if it is now his rift between him and Mai. The stuff with Ozai is very telling because, again, like I said, it showcases that Zuko is still not fully there with regards to his role in life, and I think that is especially evident because of the fact that so much has changed for him, and now he is in a position of power that is almost in some ways a lot more stressful than, say, Aang is as Avatar. He realizes the duty of controlling an entire nation bears a lot of weight on him, and so when he goes to Ozai for advice, you start to see the cracks. The dialogue between both of them showcases two sides of that. Zuko is confused and trying to figure out how Ozai stayed awake with the thought in mind of what his role was as Fire Lord. Ozai, on the other hand, I feel like is speaking to Zuko in a more manipulative way, as he's trying to get on his good side, but deep down the conversational tone feels like Ozai is trying to shift the thought process of Zuko into a more negative way of looking at things without Zuko even realizing it. That is why I again mentioned the idea of manipulation, so that now you might see Zuko have a bad turn, and if Ozai's plan is to get Zuko to agree with him and get back on his good side, then that could spark something even worse than what anyone wants to see. This leads to the next scene that came after all this, which is the stuff with Mai. She realizes that he's been keeping secrets from her as far as what he's thinking, but then what he's been doing, specifically with going to the prison. She leaves him there at the temple, and Suki comes in to say that it was her who told Mai, and this scene comes off a little weird to me because she's obviously trying to apologize, but it almost at one point maybe got a little too personal with the way that she apologizes to Zuko by saying that she cares for him, but maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into that, but you could correct me if I'm wrong, if that's the way that you read it or not. One of his generals comes in after this and tells him that a spy had picked up motion of Earth King Kuei leading his army towards Yudao, and that is when Zuko says to himself that Ozai was right, and that is not what you want to be hearing Zuko say. We see in the final panels of part 2 that Kuei and his army are marching, and he's also got a hot air balloon, which might I add is cool to see in another army's hands other than the Fire Nation, given that they had it first during the war. Things are now heating up, no pun intended, and I am really curious to see where we go now in part 3 of this final stretch of the comic. As I said in the last video, I've loved reading this comic so far. It really makes me feel like I'm watching the cartoon again as a kid, and so I look forward to seeing you all for my part 3 review. Please comment down below your thoughts on this video and my commentary review of it. If you did enjoy the video and you like this kind of content, be sure to give this video a like. If you are new to this channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell to be updated for when I upload again in the future. My fellow benders of all 4 nations, thank you all so much for stopping by Uncle Iroh's tea shop. On your way out, be sure to let him know how much you appreciated his jasmine tea and his words of wisdom that come with it. I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you all soon for more Avatar.